All right, guys, it's that time. We are reviewing Karl-Anthony Towns' first season as a Knick. Hear why it was absolutely spectacular and could have been a whole lot better.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Gavin, a credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade and the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media over at thestrick.land. In case you got lost, this is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving the most detailed insight on your favorite team. 5 whole days a week, so be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. On today's show, we are talking Karl-Anthony Towns, his phenomenal first season in New York. Seriously, I don't think people appreciate, myself included, I will raise my hand on that, how freaking good he was last year, but why there was a lot of meat left on the bone, and why hopefully Mike Brown can unlock that meat. That was a weird statement. I didn't mean to say that. Anywho, let's see what happens in terms of building around Cat long term. And if the Knicks can put together an infrastructure that best maximizes the skill sets. And if he's an ideal piece next to Jalen Brunson long term, that's a lingering question. We're going to get into all that. But before we do that, and before I say something else weird, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Alex, tell us how awesome was Karl-Anthony Towns in his first year as a Knick?
Yeah, let's get right to that meat and start building around it.
Yeah. That's been the goal of this podcast from day one.
Just to get to that line, we've peaked, folks, as a society and as a podcast. All right, so Karl-Anthony Towns, All-NBA third teamer, made the All-Star game in his first season as a Knick. 24.4 points, 12.8 rebounds per game, which was a career high, and 3.1 assists per game, all on 52.6% from the field, 42% from three, and 82.9% from the free throw line. Gavin, if you want to just find, and look, these numbers will be supported once we get into the percentage and the rate stats and all that stuff too, but real easy, low-hanging thing to look at in terms of what he did this season versus what he's done in past seasons of his career. Lowest three-pointers attempted per game since 2018 to 19. So in like 6-7 years, the lowest amount since then, with the 4.7 attempts per game, despite having nearly the best 3-point percentage of his career. He was 0.001% off of that because he shot a career high 42.1% in 2017 to 18, shot 42% this past year. So ironically, I guess weirdly, like he shot his highest percentage and then took what was his lowest to date in 3-point attempts the next year. This past year shoots his best, hopefully then increases his 3-point attempts next year, because I think that this was, in my opinion, without a doubt, the best offensive center season for a Knicks since Patrick Ewing. I don't think there's anyone that can even begin to compete with that unless you really, really, really value field goal percentage as a metric, in which case maybe you make a case for Mitchell Robinson or Tyson Chandler. But as far as offensive, I'll even just say big man seasons, you can even throw Julius Randle in there. I think this is probably
first season of Amar Stoudemire, maybe really pre All-Star break. That was like the only comparable thing, and we only saw it for what, 30 games, 35
exactly.
games.
Yeah, 35 magical games, but 35 games nonetheless. Either way, one of the best offensive big man seasons in Knicks history. I would say one of the best 3 or 4 best offensive seasons of the last 20 years, when you really consider like just how little he was used relative to his efficiency, and like how little game to game that they seem to draw up for him. I mean, I know there's some more stats that kind of support this, but to me, Gavin, I just walked away from so many games thinking, man, I wish that Cat was just more involved in the game plan for this game, because unlike a Jalen Brunson, who, like we talked about in the last episode, was relied upon so much to just like be the alpha and the omega with this team. It always just felt like you had this really powerful weapon sitting there that you just refused to pick up with Cat sometimes. And I don't know if it was by like not wanting to involve him, or if it was just as simple as Tibbs didn't do enough to get him involved. And considering Cat is not a throw him the ball and let him cook kind of player, it just kind of worked to his detriment. But we saw time and time again when he was involved in the offense early and often, he took over plenty of games and had some really, really high highs with the Knicks this year.
Yeah, and look, the big shift is something I don't want to harp on it because we've talked about it a million times and people are tired of hearing about it. But teams around December started guarding the Knicks very differently, and I think it was really like January, February where this became ubiquitous. But the smarter teams were putting their wings on Cat, putting their bigs on Josh Hart. Famously turned the Knicks offense from the second best in the NBA and one that would have ranked as I think at that point they had the fourth highest offensive rating in NBA history, maybe at one point the second highest offensive rating in NBA history. Like they were absolutely cooking. And a lot of that was based on the Jalen Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns pick and roll and pick and pop, which to your point, like it was zero prep. This offseason was immediately the most productive screening duo in the NBA. Cat, you go back to November, he was taking just under 6 threes per game. That was far and away his highest volume month of the season. He was shooting 43% from three over that month after a 4-game sample size in October where he shot 73% from three. He was barely taking any, but he could not miss at the start of the season, and he was getting tons of shots up. He was getting tons of good looks at the rim, and I felt like the good times were going to roll forever. And then teams made that pivot, and Tom Thibodeau refused to make the logical follow-up pivot, which would have been to start Deuce McBride over Josh Hart, and that really impacted Karl-Anthony Towns' season. I think the other stuff that impacted him was Jalen Brunson, like, was very good with Cat when the reads were very, very simple. And yet, our buddy Prez put together a whole video around midseason pointing this out. There was so much low-hanging fruit, and Brunson would consistently miss the hook pass back to Cat on the perimeter. Like, if anyone watched our episode yesterday, I was talking about how Brunson was ball hoggy early in the Pistons series, and you could see his teammates getting frustrated. I have such a clear visual in my mind of Brunson running a pick and pop with Cat popping. And remember, Detroit stupidly opened that series guarding Cat traditionally, right, with the center on him, and Cat popping behind the arc and him being wide open and Jalen Brunson just ignoring him to shoot like a midi pull-up over two guys. And that is just an easy hook pass that should be a part of every point guard's repertoire. And I'm hoping Mike Brown is driving that home to both of them this offseason, saying, hey, I'll use the phrase again, there's a bunch of meat left on that bone. And even if you want to play like double big lineups and you want the floor to be clogged, which I don't think they should, but maybe they will, there are a lot of ways to get Cat easier shots. And if you play 5 out, then there's a million ways to get him easy shots. And I look to that Pacers series, right, where Cat was just completely dominant. And again, it was an example of like when a team guards him traditionally, which Indiana chose to do the entire series, like there just aren't a lot of answers for the guy, right? He was at 25 and 12, 50% from the field, 30% from three, 76% from the line, and just had some absolutely monstrous games in there, particularly game one. He slowed down a little bit from there. But I think to your point, especially when you take into account the multiple injuries he dealt with, the knee, the bone spur in his thumb, like there was just there are a lot of ways he could be even better than he was this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think it just comes down to creating opportunities. And to your point, like I think that it was just, I guess when they started putting the wings on him, I just found I consistently was always thinking, why aren't they attacking that in a way? And they found ways to do it sometimes with getting the ball inside or whatever. But I think that he has the ability to punish guys that way. I also think that if you just get a little more creative with off ball actions, which I think is what has been the biggest issue for the Knicks under Tibbs, is just I think a lack of off ball movement and lack of like guys working to get open off of the ball rather than just focusing on who has the ball and setting screens for them or whatever. I feel like if you just started working things where you try to, hey, Josh Hart is being guarded by the big, Cat's being guarded by the wing, try to create an off-ball screen or an off-ball action to make them get onto the right man again, and then get that matchup that you want. And then Cat can attack that person off the dribble, or shoot a three on them or whatever. If that center hedges a little too much and stays too much to the inside, it's all those little things that I hope that Mike Brown and his assistant staff, maybe Pablo Prigioni, fingers crossed. We're hoping that maybe he ends up on the Knicks, but I think it's those sort of things that I want to see more personally. But we can talk a little more about some other stats that came up for Cat. Also, just talk about some of the big questions, such as I think this is kind of the ultimate one. Like, is he the ultimate co-star for Jalen Brunson going forward? Is this the guy that you want to build around with Jalen Brunson, if indeed Jalen Brunson is the locked-in 1A superstar on this team? And can a lineup be built around them that features Cat at the center? Does Cat have to potentially move to power forward and have a player like Mitch out there for this to work? Does it even matter? Like, if that works, does it even matter what position Cat plays, as long as things do work? So lots of stuff to still get into when we get back in just a moment. But first, I want to let y'all know about our friends over at Gametime. And have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's a game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. And Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. I've got a friend who lives in the city and will sometimes hit me up. He actually, funny enough, he heard me do this read one time and then hit me up that day to be like, hey, we should go to a Mets game today. And I said, let me just go on Gametime because it's the best ticketing app, period. But for real, though, like, if you just decide on the day of to go, there's no better app, because the prices are always the best on Gametime. I've never come out of it thinking, oh, geez, I really paid an arm and a leg trying to get into this game last minute. It's the best way to do it. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Gavin, we're back in to Locked On Knicks, talking through Karl-Anthony Towns this season, this year. And I actually want to take a little bit of a left turn, more from just talking about the offensive side of the ball strictly, and talk about rebounding a little bit. I think this was something that we saw. I mean, I mentioned at the top, right? He had a career high in rebounds per game this year at 12.8. And yet that was a number that we saw, I think, through the first couple months of the season was close to like 14 or even higher.
I have the splits in front of me. So he was first month of the year. Sorry, I'm just scrolling here. He was, October was just 4 games, and then November 13, December 14 and 14.6, January 14.4, and then from there it went down 11.6, 10.9, 12.2. Pre-All-Star break overall 13.4, post-All-Star break 11.4. I think that pretty clearly tracks with when his knee issues and his thumb issues started, but and also obviously Mitchell Robinson coming back might have affected that a little bit.
Yeah. So to me, I'll say with the Mitch thing, I don't know how much that affected anything, because we frankly barely saw them on the court together during the regular season. So I don't really think that affected too much in terms of possible rebounds for him. I will just say it did raise questions to me, and this is kind of my segue into the double big of it all, but it bringing up Mitch actually helps for this. I kind of wonder. I liked what we saw early season, but I do think that there was a clear, I think at least clear from watching him play, that the rebounding toll was part of what led, I think, to the bumps and bruises. The fact that he had to be in there in the trenches on every single play. Nothing was coming easy. He had to get all these contested rebounds. He was doing it great, and I commend him for the effort that he put in, but I do think that led to the wear and tear on his body adding up faster throughout the season. I've been kind of a proponent of double big. I think that his offense won't really suffer from it, as we saw at times during the postseason when they were able to use it, and he didn't seem to really skip a beat in those scenarios. Like, he was still able to find his offense, and Mitch was still able to get offensive rebounds and whatever else. I think the fact that Cat can shoot from anywhere on the floor helps make that possible. But I think, it was a career year rebounding the ball for Cat, but I almost would be totally fine with him falling back to like a 9 rebound a game guy and being less of like a presence there if it meant preserving him more throughout the season. To me, that reads more doing double big, but I'm curious what you think, because I know you're a big 5 out guy. I just think Cat, as the year went on, I started to notice, like, one, I'll say this again, and I said it multiple times during the season. Anything anyone is saying about him being soft or whatever is garbage. Like,
Mm.
that is the stupidest take I've ever heard. The guy played through so many injuries. He just gritted his teeth, went to work. Like, you want to talk about like lunch pail player? Like, the dude just went out there. I don't care if he yells, "Oh my God," when he's going for rebounds and getting hit and you can catch it on the court mic. That's fun, whatever. But he went out there and powered through tons of pain throughout this year, through the postseason, everything else. All that is moot. But I will say, as a normal sized large person, that, if I play multiple days and I'm banging around, whatever, my body starts to hurt pretty good. For someone who's, in the 99th percentile of tall humans and is playing as much as he was last year, which maybe that also is just an indicator of like playing a few less minutes this coming year.
Mhm.
But I would prefer to see some scenarios where he doesn't have to be down there banging quite as much in the post for those rebounds, that can preserve his body a little bit throughout the season, because I think we just saw, as the season went on, you could tell how much of a labor it was for him to get up and down the court on any given night. And that was due to that knee, whatever it was, the contusion or whatever, sprain, whatever he had going on for like pretty much the whole season, from about the midway point on. But yeah, to me, that reads as one of the indicators that maybe double big could be something good to go to more often this season, even if they could still find like a starting lineup that works good with the 5 out concept and whatever.
Yeah, so I think you just took my point. I'm still an advocate for 5 out. I don't think I need to reiterate it. I've said it a million reasons why. But I do think that's a really valuable curveball to take some of that off his body. I will say, if I had to guess, I think more of the wear and tear is due to him driving full speed at the rim and falling down constantly and taking hard falls constantly. We're going to mention this stat later, but career high 47% of his shots came at the rim this past year. I think offensively, there's probably a little bit more wear and tear there than defensively. And getting him more threes, obviously, like turning some of those, like, obviously not like the easy dunks and layups, but like those blind drive one-handed flips over 2 defenders, which he can make, but you don't want him relying on that all the time, into open 3-pointers or transition 3-pointers. Like, will preserve his body a little bit. I don't know if the rebounding, especially defensive rebounding, is what did that to him, but I do think it's valuable to Mitchell Robinson as a curveball. Important to note, like, he'll also have Gershon Yabusele next to him, when last year he was, until Mitch came back, and really, to your point, until the playoffs, like, he was never playing against or playing with another traditional big. Gershon Yabusele is not Mitchell Robinson, but he is more of like a traditional, like, 90s, early 2000s style power forward build than someone like OG Anunoby, and certainly more so than someone like Josh Hart. So I think that'll help him, and guys who could potentially take a more physical matchup. Though, to your point, like, more time with Mitchell Robinson obviously will be good in that respect. So I agree with it. Just in terms of the broader conversation about double big lineups going forward, how they work this year, barely played together in the regular season at +6 net rating. In the regular season, in the playoffs, had a +5.8 net rating. But I think that number is, which is really good, but I think it's a little bit deceptive. Like, far and away, the 2 most used lineups, which were Brunson, Deuce, OG, Cat, Mitch, was a minus 3.7 over 128 possessions. It was not a good lineup. 22nd percentile lineup, which was basically just Mitch in for Josh Hart. And the other version of that, which was the bench one, Campaign, Deuce, McHale, Cat, Mitch, was a minus 1.4. Like pretty much all their most used lineups were bad with a double big. They had these like weird small sample size ones that were just ridiculous. Like Deuce, Hart, McHale, Cat, Mitch was plus 82.5, just 15 possessions. They had two other ones that were over plus 100 in 9 or 10 possessions. So I say all this to say, like, we probably just need a larger sample size of the double big, given a lot of time they were doing it. It was against the second best team in the NBA. That might have been the best team in the NBA in the Indiana Pacers when it was all said and done. I'm curious to see it on a consistent basis against regular season teams. I just don't think it should be the starting lineup.
Yeah, I could see that being the case as well. And I mean, I think as long as you can find a starting lineup that I think the main thing that scares me is the starting lineup and how it ended up being one of the worst starting lineups in the NBA when all was said and done, given the amount of minutes that they played versus what the results were. And that I guess it will just come down to, will Mike Brown see like a Deuce McBride as a more viable starting option than Josh Hart and move Josh Hart back to the bench, where I think you and I both say there's nothing undignified about him coming off the bench, and it would make more sense. But it also raises the question of, do we trust this lineup defensively with Brunson and Cat out there? We talked about it a bit in the Brunson review yesterday, so we'll talk about it a little more today because it's just as relevant with Cat on the other side of the equation there. But how we would potentially handle the problem of teams targeting those two, as we saw in the playoffs, where even if you have a large amount of defensive talent around them otherwise, they can still get targeted, and it can generate shots for the other team. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment when we get back in and close up this discussion with a couple big picture thoughts on Cat going forward when we get right back in. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through Cat's season and talk about where we kind of go from here. I'm kind of curious your thoughts. Talked about it a little bit yesterday with Brunson. The Cat and Brunson combo at the 1 and 5. I think we thought going into the season, based off having a Mikal Bridges, based off having an OG Anunoby, and even Josh Hart, who I think has some really good defensive moments himself, we figured that having those three guys would be enough of a mitigating factor for having a week 1 and 5 out there. Turned out to really, at times, not be the case, especially during the playoffs, especially the Pacers. And I mean, maybe this is just brilliant coaching by Rick Carlisle compared to Tibbs, but the Pacers were just ad nauseum able to get Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns as the two guys in the action at the top of the key, and created looks for guys that way by just taking advantage of the fact that Brunson is not a great screen navigator. The Cat is not great in drop, which the Knicks had him playing rather than playing switch everything. We did see during the Celtics series, it was kind of a series swinging thing to have Cat and Brunson switch everything. And Cat, I think, held his own extremely well.
Yeah.
Through the whole season, honestly, in switch everything scenarios. Like, yes, he's going to have the occasional boneheaded foul or whatever. He's going to overplay someone sometimes, but I think he's more likely to do that when he's scrambling in drop than when he has a singular focus on someone. When he has that singular focus, sort of similar like Julius Randle, where Randle used to have some really insane one-on-one possessions where he looked amazing against like a really good offensive player, and yet sometimes would look more lost in scenarios where he had to kind of track the ball off ball and, just or track the ball certainly in a like a pick and roll scenario, whatever, became way too much for him to process, whereas just a one-on-one matchup was perfectly acceptable. Same thing kind of happened with Cat, I think, where you get him in a one-on-one against Jason Tatum, he actually holds up pretty well and can keep him in front of him and even, make a play to stop him from taking a shot and make him pass out of what could have been a shot against someone else. I don't hate doing that. I think that the Knicks should look into doing that more when those two are out there. I don't know if that's something that they can do every game all the time, because I feel like teams would then just try to wear Cat out in that case
Yeah.
because they're going to try to generate that switch all the time. And then you can't have Cat guarding every single possession that way.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. Like if the starting lineup, let's say that they make the change that like if they're going to stick with something that's similar in vibes to the current starting lineup, I think you and I agree putting Deuce McBride in there for Josh Hart makes a lot of sense. You can have Deuce run point of attack instead of Mikal Bridges. That allows Mikal and OG to do what they kind of do best, which is just like a ball hawk around, get steals, start fast break opportunities, and have Deuce do what he does best, which is point of attack defense, screen navigation, all that good stuff. But is that enough to still support having Brunson and Cat out there at the 1 and 5? Or is it still going to be a little too much? Or will the offensive benefits just outweigh it? I feel like there's a multi-layered question to how this all works out. And it's all very interesting to me in terms of like if Cat is the right guy for this team going forward, if you want to build a lineup like that, or if you need to get eventually like a wing type player in that can score like that and have just a more defensive minded center, but then you lose out on all that offensive advantage. It's so many things, but I think if they could just figure out how to make that defense work, they could be back in really good shape again and potentially, a finals team next year.
Yeah, to me, the big picture answer is you traded, and this is the argument. Shout out to our guy XJ at Hot and Theory because I copped it from him. But if you're trading for Karl-Anthony Towns, you're making a commitment to given the tertiary roster to being one of the greatest offenses in the history of basketball, and you have to be as savvy as possible in terms of your tweaks and the consistency of those tweaks, aka adjustments on the defensive end to cover them up as much as humanly possible. And you hope and pray that that's enough, right? Like that is the theory. If you're building around Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns, and too often, really all the time, Tom Thibodeau refused to lean into the full potential of what the offense could be. And that's not to absolve Cat of blame on the defensive end. We all saw the article from James Edwards and Fred Katz at the end of the year where it was a real frustration from presumably Mikal Bridges, but seemingly the entire team, that Cat at times just did not know the scheme. Like we were complaining about Tibbs and saying, oh, he's such a moron. He put Cat in drop against the Pacers, but a lot of the and I think he probably did do that at points. So it's not to like make fun of our past takes because I'm sure there was some of that. But the consensus was like that was Cat like just going rogue and saying or forgetting what he's supposed to be doing. And we talked about in the Mikal Bridges episode and so many times with Mikal Bridges how he had the worst screen navigating season in the NBA. Like I don't care what you want to say about Mikal Bridges. Like even if he's diminished athletically, it should not be that bad. And I think a lot of the reason it was that bad is because he had no idea what he was going to get from Cat, either in terms of effort or in terms of Cat just actually playing the right scheme, or if he's checking those first two boxes in terms of execution. Like Cat, by eye test, single-handedly tanked the Knicks defense at times. And yet, if you look into the numbers, during the regular season, they were 0.1 points better defensively when Karl-Anthony Towns was on the floor. In the playoffs, that shot way up. They were 7 points better defensively when Karl-Anthony Towns was on the floor. Some of that might have been influenced by the increase in double big and the fact that he was playing with Mitchell Robinson, who was just like Mitch could cover up everything defensively. And we both agree Cat is dramatically less harmful on defense at the 4 than he is at the 5, where he's, to your point, the focal point of all those pick and rolls, all those pick and pops, and he's just not good enough to cover in those situations. But I do think those stats are somewhat telling and maybe indicative of the fact that Jalen Brunson is an even bigger issue than Karl-Anthony Towns. Rebounding is a big part of defense, as we've said. Cat was as good as anyone at that particular skill on that end of the floor. But to circle back, the best thing that Mike Brown can do is actually experiment during the regular season. You've mentioned a million times, like play some zone, which Tom Thibodeau is outside of like inbounds plays, essentially never did. Switch him against different opponents. Chris Finch very famously like blitzed with Cat all the time in 21-22. And the Knicks tried doing that against the Pistons and Cade Cunningham early in that series and were very, very effective doing so. We can finish up talking about a little more about the offense and some of the clutch shot making. Cat is a transcendent offensive player. I don't think he was fully unlocked last year. And I think if you maximize him that end, you can live with some of the defense. He has to be a little bit better just in and of himself if the Knicks are going to win a championship, though.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I guess that brings me to just the final question as we wrap up here. I mean, it's only one season in, but we see big names floated around the Knicks all the time. I mean, obviously, we've seen, I mean, there's been reports that I think it was Ian Begley mentioned this on his show that the reason that we maybe haven't seen a Mikal Bridges extension yet is that they're still monitoring like Giannis's situation, things like that. So it seems like the Knicks maybe themselves are not fully committed to the Karl-Anthony Towns experience. Where do you stand after 1 year? Do you think that this guy? Do you think you could win a championship with Cat as one of your focal points, or do you think that you cannot? I personally, I lean towards you can, but you have to get it just right.
Yeah.
I think the defensive, like it's sort of similar. Like I feel like a lot of the big men in the league that are like the star big men all have like one glaring thing that make it hard to make them one of the best players. Like I think if you could tell me that like Cat could have Joel Embiid's defense or something, then you're like, oh, absolutely, you could do that. But the defense is the big thing with Cat. Obviously, with Embiid, it's like it's the injuries. It's like if Embiid could just stay healthy, he could potentially be the best player on a championship team. With Jokic, it was the defense, but I think that he's done well to correct that. And then we saw him win a championship as the the best player on a championship team and one of the best players on planet Earth. And that's, I mean, that's sort of like the short list of guys that I think are in this category as far as top centers in the league. Wemby will be there soon enough. Maybe already is there. I don't know. But, with him, it's just going to be getting to the point of being, having a better team around him and then seeing how he reacts to that.
Yeah.
But either way, how do you feel about Cat potentially being on a championship team? Do you think it is something that could potentially happen, or do you think it's kind of he's like the guy before the guy?
No, I think he could be. I think it's all a question of margins, to your point, and it's a lot of what I just said. You tweak the defense as much as you can, as consistently as you can. You're hoping Mike Brown is the coach that will just give you a schematic advantage on that end of the floor. You hope Cat cut some of the mental errors. 10 years into the NBA, I think we just have to say that that's probably who he is, and it's probably always going to be a part of the package at times. I think he did well to do that and to play a little bit smarter. Like, one of the great things about switching with him is like it takes a lot of the brain work out of it, right? He doesn't have to do a whole lot of thinking. See ball, guard ball, and he's pretty good at that. But I think there was enough there to win with him. I just think you have to get lucky to some extent and bank on some shooting variance, but that's why you have a team full of great shooters, which the Knicks do now. Like they added Jordan Clarkson who can shoot the ball. They added Gershon Yabusele who can shoot the ball. You would expect a bounce back from Mikal Bridges in that area. You're hoping OG can shoot better from the corners. Like I think they have the talent to be a titanic offensive force in the NBA. And if you do that, no, you're not going to be good as Oklahoma City. Is that potential on both ends of the floor? But you're one injury away or one flukily bad shooting series away from a team like the Thunder to getting there, because I think we're both very confident that they are perfectly capable of beating every single team in the Eastern Conference, and arguably on paper, maybe right there with Cleveland, should be favored over every team in the Eastern Conference. So I do think they're good enough to win a championship. It is just going to be on very thin margins unless you turn Cat into someone like Giannis. You turn Cat into someone like Devin Booker. That's amazing in some ways, but that opens up a whole new set of questions about, all right, well, if Mitchell Robinson's your center, do you have enough floor spacing? Do you have enough creativity on offense? So there, to your point, there are trade-offs with everything. I think Cat is good enough, and I think mainly the roster around him is good enough to cover up enough of his weaknesses that you could win a title with him.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. Hopefully the Knicks are able to win a title with him, because that would be pretty sweet. But we'll see what ends up happening there. We'll have you covered with more player reviews. We got some more players to get into in the coming weeks as we start gearing towards then previewing guys and going over some things going into next season. So lots more good stuff to talk about. But until then, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody.